She wrapped her arms around herself as the cold ocean wind swept across the tiny island. The setting sun painted the sky in orange and crimson, while waves crashed endlessly against the rocks. Looking straight into my eyes, she gave a tired smile and whispered, "I'm just a woman, and you're what I want." For a second, I forgot the hunger, the fear, and the fact that we hadn't seen another human being in 3 days. My name is Ethan, and until that terrible boat accident, I believed survival depended only on strength and planning. Then I met Claire. We had boarded the same tourist yacht without exchanging more than a polite greeting. When the unexpected storm struck, the sea turned into a monster. Giant waves shattered the boat, throwing passengers into the freezing water. Somehow, I managed to grab a floating wooden panel. Minutes later, I heard someone screaming. It was Claire. I swam toward her with every bit of strength I had left. Together we held onto the broken plank until the waves carried us toward a lonely tropical island hidden far from civilization. The first day was chaos. By sunset, we had found a small stream flowing from the rocks and gathered coconuts scattered beneath the palm trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive another day. The nights were the hardest. The jungle echoed with strange sounds. Every crack of a branch felt like danger creeping closer. We built a shelter using large leaves and broken branches, taking turns staying awake to keep watch. Claire rarely complained. Instead, she smiled through exhaustion, encouraging both of us whenever hope seemed to disappear. On the third evening, after another failed attempt to signal passing ships with smoke, she sat beside the fire in complete silence. "I've been pretending to stay strong," she admitted softly. "So have I confessed." She looked toward the endless ocean. "I spent my whole life chasing promotions, expensive vacations, perfect photos for people I barely liked." She laughed bitterly. "And now none of that matters." Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The fire crackled between us while stars slowly appeared above the island. Then she turned toward me. "I'm just a woman," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And you're what I want." I understood what she meant. It wasn't about romance born from desperation. It was about trust. About finding the only familiar face in a world that suddenly felt empty. I reached for her hand. "I'm scared too." She squeezed my fingers. "For the first time," she said, "I don't want to face tomorrow alone." That night, we sat shoulder to shoulder until sunrise, talking about everything we'd never told anyone else. She dreamed of opening a small bookstore instead of returning to her corporate career. I admitted I had spent years working non-stop after losing my father, believing success could replace family. The island stripped away every lie we'd been telling ourselves. It reminded us that people matter far more than possessions. On the fifth morning, I climbed the highest cliff one last time. As the sunlight broke through the clouds, something caught my eye. A tiny fishing boat. At first I thought it was another illusion. Then it grew larger. I grabbed burning branches from our signal fire and waved them wildly while Claire threw green leaves onto the flames, creating thick white smoke. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the boat changed direction. They saw us. Claire shouted through tears. The fishermen reached the shore just before sunset. As they helped us aboard, I looked back at the island that had nearly become our final home. It had taken everything away from us. Yet somehow, it had also given us something priceless. Weeks later, after returning home, life slowly returned to normal. Except neither of us wanted our old lives anymore. Claire left her stressful corporate job and finally opened the cozy neighborhood bookstore she'd always imagined. I reduced my working hours and began spending more time with the people I loved instead of chasing endless promotions. Sometimes we'd sit together with coffee, smiling at the memory of the island that changed everything. People often asked if surviving that nightmare was the greatest miracle of our lives. I always smiled before answering. No. The real miracle wasn't escaping the island. It was discovering that when everything else disappears, the right person beside you can become the strongest reason to keep living. Life after the rescue wasn't as simple as either of us had imagined. The news called us the miracle survivors. Reporters wanted interviews. Television hosts invited us to share our incredible story. Everyone was fascinated by the storm, the deserted island, and the dramatic rescue. But no one understood the quiet battles that followed. For weeks, I couldn't fall asleep without hearing waves crashing against the shore. Claire confessed that she still woke up terrified whenever heavy rain hit her apartment windows. Instead of pretending everything was fine, we helped each other heal. Every Friday evening, we met at the little bookstore Claire had finally opened. It smelled of fresh coffee and old paper, nothing like the salty air of the island, yet somehow it felt just as comforting. I'd help her arrange new books while she laughed at my terrible sense of organization. One rainy afternoon, the electricity suddenly went out. The shop fell silent. Claire froze. I could see fear flash across her face. The darkness reminded both of us of those frightening nights on the island. Without saying a word, I found a candle, lit it, and placed it on the counter. Its small flame filled the room with warm light. Claire looked at me and smiled through watery eyes. "You remembered." "I always will," I replied. That simple moment meant more than any expensive gift. Months passed, and our friendship quietly became something deeper. There were no dramatic speeches or grand gestures. Love grew in the ordinary moments, sharing breakfast after opening the store, walking through the park on lazy Sunday afternoons, and laughing over memories that had once brought tears. One evening, we decided to visit the coast where our rescue boat had finally brought us ashore. The ocean was calm this time. We stood together watching the sunset, listening to gentle waves instead of violent storms. Claire slipped her hand into mine. "Do you ever wish that storm had never happened?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I hate what we went through," I admitted. "But if it hadn't happened, I would have spent the rest of my life chasing money instead of happiness. And I never would have met the woman who taught me what really matters." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I almost lost my life out there." "So did I. But somehow," she whispered, "we found each other." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny seashell I'd secretly kept from the island all those months ago. I carried this to remind myself that every ending can become a beginning. Her eyes widened. "I don't ever want to imagine another future without you." Neither did I. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I asked the simplest question I'd ever spoken. "Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Claire laughed through happy tears before wrapping her arms around me. "I thought you'd never ask." The ocean breeze felt warm instead of frightening. For the first time since the storm, the sound of the waves no longer reminded us of survival. It reminded us of second chances. Sometimes life tears everything apart before showing us what truly belongs in our hearts. We thought we had been trapped on an island, but in the end, we realized the real prison had been the lives we were living before we met. And the greatest rescue wasn't the fishing boat that carried us home, it was the love that gave us a reason to begin again. A year later, Claire and I returned to the island. Not because we had forgotten the fear, but because we wanted to thank the place that had changed our lives forever. The Coast Guard agreed to take us close enough by boat, warning us that the island was still uninhabited and rarely visited. As we stepped onto the familiar white sand, a strange silence surrounded us. The palm trees still swayed in the breeze, the stream still flowed through the rocks, and the same cliff overlooked the endless blue ocean. "It hasn't changed at all," Claire whispered. I smiled. "No, we've changed." We walked to the remains of the shelter we had built from branches and palm leaves. Time had almost erased it, leaving only a few weathered sticks buried beneath the sand. Claire knelt down and gently brushed the sand away. "This little place kept us alive. It gave us hope," I said. We spent the afternoon cleaning the beach, collecting plastic bottles and fishing nets that had washed ashore. It felt like the right way to say thank you. As the sun began to set, we climbed the same cliff where I had once spotted the fishing boat. The view was breathtaking. Orange light reflected across the calm sea, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Claire leaned against my shoulder. "Remember what I told you here?" she asked with a smile. I laughed softly. How could I forget? She looked into my eyes, just as she had on that unforgettable night. "I told you, I'm just a woman, and you're what I want." You changed my life with those words. She shook her head. No. We changed each other's lives. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were 2 simple silver rings. "We never had a wedding on the beach like you once dreamed," I said. "So, how about now?" Claire covered her mouth in surprise. With only the ocean, the wind, and the setting sun as our witnesses, we exchanged vows that came straight from our hearts. "I promise," I said, slipping the ring onto her finger, "that no matter where life takes us, I'll always choose you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "And I promise," she replied, placing the other ring on my hand, "that whether we're surrounded by storms or sunshine, you'll never face another day alone." There were no guests. No music. No expensive decorations. Just 2 people who had learned that love doesn't need perfection, it only needs honesty. When we returned home, we started a small charity dedicated to helping survivors of natural disasters rebuild their lives. Some needed financial support. Others simply needed someone who understood what they had been through. Every person we helped reminded us of ourselves. Years later, our bookstore had grown into a beloved community gathering place. Children filled its reading corners with laughter, families attended weekend events, and a small plaque near the entrance read, "Hope can be found in the most unexpected places." Whenever someone asked about the meaning behind those words, Claire and I would smile at each other. We knew the answer. It wasn't hidden in the bookstore. It wasn't even on that distant island. It lived in every choice to trust, to forgive, to love, and to keep moving forward after life had tried to break us. The storm that once seemed like the end of our story had become the beginning of everything beautiful. Sometimes the greatest destination isn't a place on a map, it's the person who stands beside you through every wave, every sunrise, and every tomorrow. And every time Claire reached for my hand, I silently thanked the island where 2 strangers had discovered that the strongest shelter in the world isn't built from wood or stone. It's built from love.